Hello everyone, how's it going? I'm Captain Logan, and I wanted to stream this afternoon and talk about something that I've been thinking about doing all year so far, all 2.5 weeks of this year, and I thought no better time to do it than earlier rather than later in the year, and I had a little bit of time this afternoon once again, so welcome everybody. Thanks a bunch for being here. I'm going to reminisce a little bit about a year that is very, very important to me, probably the most important year in my history, and I don't know how long I'm going to stream this afternoon. This might be half an hour, this might be an hour. I wanted to talk about ins and outs of 2003. It's been 20 years, and this is a year that is always in the back of my mind. I'm real sentimental and nostalgic for particular years in history, in my own personal history. This is going to be a little bit self-indulgent, but I'm going to talk about some geeky and cultural stuff also. I'm not going to get, super deeply personal, but maybe a little bit more so than I usually do. Really, really formative year for me. 1989 is a really important year for me. 1995 is that way. But 2003 is the big one. 03 was, and it's just crazy to think that it's been as long as it has. Super formative. I'm not anything like the person I am without some of the things that happened that year. And I think that the year that you graduate high school is a major year for everybody anyway, but the big thing that puts it over the top for me, and I can't help but sometimes really miss it and wish that I was back in that period of history, is because it was actually one of the worst years of my life initially, and then it turned around in a massive, massive way. 2003 is both the year that I break up with a super serious girlfriend that I thought I was going to marry. This isn't a thing I've talked about very much on the channel, and I'm not going to get into the details of it really, but I'll just say it was a really traumatic experience, and I don't mean to be melodramatic when I say that. It's like, a lot of kids, a lot of seniors in high school go through real rough breakups. This was a maybe somewhat unusual case. There were a lot of, and I'm not gonna mention her name. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I have not seen the girl that I was dating at that time since 2004. I saw her a couple more times after this, and we more or less made up. So we would be on good terms probably if I were still talking to her, but just principle thing, I met my wife after that. It didn't really seem to make a lot of sense to keep maintaining a relationship of any kind with this person. So, like I said, we'd probably be on really good terms now. If for some reason she finds this video and is watching it, I hope you're doing really well, and thanks a lot for taking a look at what I'm doing now, 20 years after all of this. I know she's married now. I wish her luck. I hope everything is going really great for her, but there was a... there were mental issues at play, mental health issues, and it was a real rough time. I don't remember a lot of my senior year, and I got a 4.0 average, and I don't know how I managed that. I can't begin to tell you because I don't remember going to class. I know I did. I showed up for stuff, and that's not me touting up how amazingly smart I am. I think it was just too easy at that point. I think I had maybe some blow-off classes, but I also think that public school just in general right then was maybe not what it should have been. And I've talked about this before. I've got lots and lots of issues with public school. I think it's way worse now from what little I understand, but I'm out of touch. It's not like I'm in there. Anyway, so yeah, I had a super difficult time right around graduation. I had been really serious with this girl for a year and a half, I think. It's been a long time, so I'm trying to jump back into the recesses of memory. And she was chronically depressed, and ultimately I felt like she had become kind of detrimental to my academic success, even though somehow I managed, a 4.0, and I was starting to get to a really depressed place, and it seemed like I needed to get my distance from this person. And so I ended up doing the thing where, like, because I didn't really want to fully break it off. I was hoping it would work out. So I was like, I'm gonna need some time away from you, and that didn't go real well. And this happened 2 weeks before prom. So everybody's got a crappy prom story, right? I had a horrible prom. I shouldn't have gone to prom. And I was supposed to go with her. I'll say too, by the way, that so just in case this sounds crazy and wrong to you, I was 18 my senior year. I was held back in school 1 year, going all the way back to kindergarten and first grade. My mom put me in something called developmental first grade, and I graduated a year later than I would have if I hadn't been held back. So all the way up, I was with the wrong class. And the girl that I was dating was actually in college already. So I was a senior in high school, and I think she was a sophomore or a junior in college. So I was 18, and she would have been 20 or 21 at that point. And she was supposed to come to prom with me, and anyway, that whole thing ended up not working out, and it was just a real bleak kind of period. So then fast forward to the summer, and well, real quick, if you want to know very briefly my horrible prom story, I went with another girl who it was totally platonic. Neither of us had any intention on trying to develop a relationship, but she was real cool and gracious and went with me. We were friends, and she was in the theater department, and she was real bummed out that her, like I guess she started dating a guy after I had asked her, and she was upset because he wasn't there with her, and she was trying not to, make it an awful night for me, but it didn't really work out because at the end of it, she ended up wanting to leave early, and she had a car and I didn't, so she had driven, and I had to get friends to take me home. It was awful. It was not a great night. It was, maybe I've told that story before, but yeah, looking back on it now, it's kind of hilarious. But that was what my prom was like. I don't have pictures. Maybe my mom does. I don't care. I don't want to see those. Anyway, so that summer, though, was somehow wonderful because I was in almost complete isolation for 3 months and was able to just collect my thoughts and really find myself. And this is that real formative time in your life, right after high school, when you're trying to decide what you want to do with yourself and who you're going to be moving forward. I knew that I wanted to write short stories and novels, and maybe I was kind of on the fence between doing that and trying to get a regular job that would pay the bills on top of it, because I thought about going to college for to become a therapist, and so I was between psychology and creative writing, and I ended up choosing creative writing, and so I always knew I was going to do that, but I didn't know if that would be like the breadwinning job. I mean, I figured I probably would never make a lot of money doing that, but I was like, am I going to go to college practically and make it about earning a living, or am I going to go for a craft? And of course, you guys know me, I'm not the most practical person. I went and tried to develop my craft. But I didn't go to college right away. I actually took a year off, partly because of this kind of traumatic experience. I was, again, I don't want to get real deep into what exactly happened, but like, I was in and out of the hospital and stuff, and it was, I mean, not me personally, but visiting the person I was dating, and again, if she ever sees this, I hope she doesn't mind me telling this story, but I'm not mentioning names or anything, and this is 2 decades ago now. Anyway, so I go to visit my dad in Arkansas for the 3 months over the summer, and I just did a lot of reading, and I started writing a novella, which I finished, but I've never really used for anything. I did a rewrite of it in college for like a one-on-one class that I had with my with my primary mentor. who I'm still somewhat in contact with today. Greg Luthi from Johnson County Community College. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. I start at a community college, and then eventually I go to KU. I transfer credits. And anyway, that was just a beautiful time in my life. I was staying up till 4 in the morning, sleeping in till 10 or 11. My dad had, and just all night long, I'm working on things. Like, I'm not just messing around. I was writing, I was exercising, I got in really good physical shape. I was doing all of this on my own. I felt like I was, this is gonna sound silly, but I felt like I was training to be a superhero or something, and it was just all for me, and I really enjoyed that. And I was working with my dad. He owned several flea markets, all in a 2-block radius in a little town called Morrill, Arkansas. And he had four flea markets, and one of them was a bookstore, and one of them was this huge, I don't know how many square feet it was, 10,000 square feet. It was this massive store. And I had keys to both stores. Dad lived above one, which was really neat. It was this unfinished. This is partly why I like unfinished spaces, I guess. Why my bunker is the way it is. He lived above the store that he worked in. It was barely legal to even do that. He had to get special permission from the local authorities to even live in his store, and it's a very free country, you guys. No, and it was a lot of fun. Just the atmosphere up there. It was this huge space, and like I said, nothing was finished, and it felt like living in the loft from the Daredevil TV show, or even that movie. And that movie was that year and had a profound effect on me. Again, that might sound silly because it's kind of a goofy movie in some ways, but at that time it really made an impression on me. Of course, I was kind of impressionable, and with its kind of moodiness and atmosphere, if nothing else. And so that summer, I was just by myself a lot, and it was cathartic, and it made a lot of difference. I was listening to a lot of hard rock right then, what you might think of as kind of silly, almost emo music these days, but that was a big year for metal and for rock, and I hadn't really listened to stuff as hard as the stuff I was listening to right then. But it's kind of crazy looking at a list of the big songs that were that year, because I was listening to a radio station from Little Rock, Arkansas, called The Edge, which, by the way, is still around and still plays more or less the same music, at least a lot of it, which is funny. And a lot of the music that they had on rotation was all just from that year, and I don't think I realized it at the time. I think I figured it went back 2 or 3 years, but it was all from right then, and this would have been June, July, August, so stuff that had only been out for 6 months. So the front half of that year, it's crazy how big it was for music, and how big of a cultural impact there was right then. You had Jets, Are You Gonna Be My Girl? You had, of course, Evanescence was real big, partly because of Daredevil, with both Going Under and Bring Me to Life. And you had, of course, Nickelback is Nickelback, but that was real big. You had Seven Nation Army by White Stripes. You had Godsmack with Serenity. It's kind of wild. It felt like almost a whole subgenre of music was happening. What some people call angry white boy music. And I was real big into that. That was happening right then, and that was kind of the soundtrack for my life for a minute. And I'm very nostalgic for that period. I miss walking around downtown there. I miss living above my dad's store. When he finally left there the very next year, I think it was, I remember standing with Sarah in in the attic. I say attic area. I guess it was just a second level that he wasn't using for retail, but he could have. There's a staircase that went up, and he had as much square footage at the top as he did on the bottom, but he wasn't filling it with vendors. And I just remember standing with Sarah above there thinking this is the last time I will be in this space, and it was real sad. It was real kind of bittersweet. So when I say that it was it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was because I had that awful breakup, and I was in a real depressed, almost self-destructive place before that. And then I spent a summer figuring myself out. And then, and pardon me for the long story here, and then when I moved back to Kansas, I grew up in Lawrence, and that's where my mom still lives, and I went to school there my last 2.5 years of college, KU. I met Sarah the very next week when I came back from there. So I have this terrible breakup, and then the same year I meet the woman that I end up marrying, that I've been together with for 15 years this year. And it was an insanely important year, and it felt like 5, with just how much personal history happened all in that in a very, very small time frame. So I've told this story before, but for those of you that haven't heard it, in case you're interested, I'll mention it again. My wife and I met at church. I'm not a churchgoer anymore. My wife still is. We've made it work. We get along just fine, having different feelings about this, but and I don't feel the need to get into that. But I grew up in the Lutheran Church. My mom was real devout Catholic growing up, and eventually she changed denominations and went to the Lutheran Church, but is still, a heavy churchgoer, and that's where I get my musical background. So I was in choirs all growing up, and I was also in bell choir, handbells, which was a lot of fun, and I kind of missed that. And my stepdad was the music director at that church, and weirdly, I met both of the very serious girlfriends I had in the same place, which I was worried was prophetic and maybe a bad idea to even ask Sarah out because of this. The girl that I had been with before played on the back table with me, so the really big, heavy bells. We had the heaviest bells, both of us. We were playing on in bass clef bells, and it was because both of us read music a little bit, and I don't read real well, but I could figure that out, and we both read some bass clef, because when I was in choirs, I had to go between the two clefs, treble and bass, quite a bit, because sometimes I would sing tenor, and sometimes I would sing baritone. And so you'd be straddling that line all the time, if you know anything about music. And when my ex-girlfriend left over the summer, well, I say over the summer, just as the fall was starting, the bell choir started up before I got back from Arkansas, so it was like a whole month or 2 weeks to a month that they were rehearsing, and I wasn't there yet. So I came back to my back spot, and Sarah was already there, and she was in the exact same place that my ex-girlfriend was, and they were the only two girls close to my age that were ever in that bell choir, and I ended up dating both of them, and I married one of them. And I asked Sarah out a week after I met her. My sister, before I even met Sarah, my whole family had met her before I did, and my sister was begging me to ask her out because she thought Sarah was great, and she thought that we would get along really well. And we hit it off because I was a writer, and Sarah was writing and wanting to get more into that, and was kind of a literature buff. And well, I say a literature buff. She was a language buff, but she'd read a lot. And we hit it off right away, and I had a thing with her that I hadn't really had before, which was, the girls that I had dated before, I never had anybody as serious as my previous girlfriend, but the girls that I dated before that, I became, good friends with them for a while, and then we dated. And with Sarah and I, it was all at the same time. I didn't even really know what this relationship was. We just kind of let it blossom and become what it was going to become. But anyway, that's why that year is such a big deal to me. And it was a big cultural year too. So some of my geekiness certainly is cemented by that year. We start getting to what we thought was the superhero movie onslaught, but had no idea what we were in for after '08 with Dark Knight and Iron Man. Of course, you never thought you'd see a Daredevil movie, and that came out that year. Just before that, you'd had Spider-Man in 2002, and then that summer, just as my whole world is falling apart, X2 comes out, and that was part of the reason that was such a big movie for me. Was just it was a wonderful escape from things that were going on in my life. And I worked in a movie theater from '02 to '03. I was there for 9 or 10 months. I left when I went to Arkansas, tried to get my job back when I came back, and wasn't able to do that. And I saw a lot more movies that year than I really had before, and probably more in the theater than I ever had. And most people that work in a theater will tell you this, because you can see movies for free, and you go to midnight showings, ostensibly to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the film, but you're really there just to get to see free movies. And I saw lots of stuff I never would have thought to otherwise. I saw more horror movies than I ever had. I saw Willard when that came out. I remember that. But some movies, I'm just looking at a list here that I saw while I worked at the theater that were kind of special to me. Bruce Almighty was another kind of, nice escape right then. Hulk came out that year too. I remember taking a girl who I think worked at the movie theater to Hulk. When I was kind of, in between before I went to Arkansas, and just in between everything in life right then. And we went out one time and didn't really hit it off, but, it was fine. And that was the movie we saw together. I guess, the second Lord of the Rings came out that year. I remember that. I think one of the Harry Potters was that year. Matrix Reloaded was that year. As not great of a story that is, I saw that a bunch of times in the theater. I loved that as kind of a roller coaster ride. I saw a Jack Nicholson movie called About Schmidt, and I've been meaning to go back to that and maybe do a little review at some point, because that is a kind of depressing movie about getting old, but it's a really good character study, and it's one of my favorite Jack Nicholson performances. In some ways, it is my favorite. But anyway, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about, is just that year, and what I was doing then. I've never been able to recapture exactly the feeling I had of that summer when I was just being creative and left to my own devices. It's also kind of weird now that I'm going back and thinking about it. I'm trying to put myself back in that period. It's kind of weird to consider how that summer influenced my Star Trek fandom, because my dad bought me, so I thought of myself as a big Star Trek fan, and I actually had run a Star Trek club my senior year in high school, and that was one of the things that I did for fun and again to kind of escape from things. And we had a float in the homecoming parade. I've talked about this before. The football coach, who was my history teacher, you might not think we'd get along, because I was kind of nerdy, and he was the football coach. He comes up to me one day in the hallway and he says, "If Star Trek doesn't have a float in the homecoming parade, I'm going to flunk you." And I said, "Okay, I guess we'll put a float together." And I had a friend that was with me in that club all the time, kind of helped me run it, whose dad had a trailer that he let us borrow, and we put together a Star Trek float. It was great. We drew, we painted huge warp nacelles on the sides of it with big paper and stuff, and we all dressed up, and I was in Klingon prosthetics and stuff. There was actually, I'll say, I had a lot of fun in school that year. Weirdly, I really liked my high school quite a bit, and a lot of people didn't, because it was high school, and in some ways high school is always oppressive, and it looked a little bit like a prison, and a lot of people didn't want to be there. But I had some wonderful teachers that I just had really good relationships with, really good rapport that were kind of mentors for me. And I had, in particular, and this probably has something to do with why I wanted to write, I had and probably why I got into review too. I had an English teacher who was who taught a science fiction class that I took in senior year, and who taught, I guess right before that, I took her epic tradition class. And she was just wonderfully challenging, but also really appreciated creativity and gave us a lot of excuses to do really interesting and fun projects that challenged us creatively. I did a big project for the science fiction course about Klingon culture, and dressed up in Klingon garb and did the forehead and the whole kit and caboodle. And she was wonderful. She cemented kind of a love for literature, or storytelling, I should say, for me. Like, that was already there some, but yeah, Miller was her last name. She had a lot to do with that. But anyway, let's see what some folks are saying in the comments here. Bob the Hun, people liked Matrix Reloaded when it came out. They certainly did. It was not disliked the way it is now. Absolutely. Robert Wild, now I love even more that the infected outbreak starts in 2003 in the premise for The Last of Us. Oh, I didn't realize that, because I've never played past the first hour of Last of Us, and I want to, but I've actually been thinking about maybe watching the pilot for that show, because I'm hearing it turned out really well, and it might be interesting to get a perspective from a person that doesn't know the game just as a narrative, and I'm like a closeted zombie fan, so I'm kind of curious to watch it. So I'm thinking about doing that. But you remind me that 28 Days Later also came out that year. So I guess in a roundabout way that created or started my love for zombies, even though I didn't realize that I'm sort of a zombie fan until this year. It's odd. AMC, this is becoming quite the juicy stream. Cap is really spilling the beans. Yeah, a little bit. I wasn't sure how much of some of that I wanted to get into, but I wasn't sure how to describe how wonderful that year turned into unless I talked a little bit about what was difficult about it in the first place. Of course, you're 18, you're becoming more independent, you're trying to figure out who you are apart from your parents. I had some, I had a couple of minor incidents, nothing real interesting or juicy, as you put it, that I wasn't sure that I wanted to tell my parents about. Where, see, I shouldn't put it like that, because you're gonna think this is gonna be way more interesting than it is. But I was, and I think a lot of kids at this time in their lives probably have this kind of thing. There was a time where I accidentally locked my keys in my car, and I didn't call my parents about it because I was at the theater. I'd seen a movie, and it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and I didn't want to wake anybody up in my house, and I was just embarrassed about it, and I wanted to be independent. I wanted to not rely on anybody. So I ended up paying like a $80 or $100 bill for the locksmith out of money that I'd gotten for graduation, and I hated myself for that. I didn't tell my parents. I probably told her about it now, or told my mom about it now, but I didn't tell my folks about that. And you make kind of some dumb choices while you're trying to figure out how to be your own person. Dimwit Monkey, are you Daredevil? I am not. I'm not quite blind, but I'm sort of close. John Ty, was this high school relationship why you had an emotional connection to Betty Ross and Ang Lee's Hulk? Yeah, actually, it has everything to do with that. Yeah, and it has a lot to do with just my overall interest in mental health and why I was considering going into psychology. And I don't know, maybe someday a second career. I still think I could maybe be a half-decent therapist if I went to school and I did the work. Robert Wild, yeah, Cap, you should watch the pilot. I love the game, and I love the show so far. I'd love to hear from anybody else whether it makes sense to watch that without knowing the material, if it stands real well on its own. It seems like, from what I've heard, just a straight-up adaptation that accurately captures the spirit and the mood of that game, and that's what that kind of thing should be. I've heard some people, when that was originally announced, I heard some people say, it doesn't make sense to make a adaptation of a really story-driven video game because you can just play the video game. And if it's done well, my response to that is, but they're different mediums. And like, it makes sense, even though they're both on screen, one of them is interactive and one of them is not, and not everybody wants to play the dozens or hundreds of hours of a video game to get the whole story, and some people just aren't gamers in the same way that some people aren't going to read a comic book. And that's why it's frustrating when comic stories get adapted. And like, you can adapt a comic story and it'd be a lot different and still be great, but it can be frustrating when you really water it down for the masses because they think they're experiencing that story, but what they're getting is just kind of the cliff notes or a or just a real compromised version that sometimes is kind of barely a story in comparison. And so you want, or I personally want these things to be, more or less like good adaptations that take advantage of the medium, but that you don't have to look at the original material, because you don't want them to just be supplemental, but also for folks that might love that story but just aren't going to consume it in that medium. And we only have so much time in our day and our lives. Life is short, and not everybody's, even if you are a gamer, not everybody's going to have time to play every video game. So I want more things like that for great story-driven games because I'm not great at modern video games. I'm not always going to play them. Last of Us, I do want to finally sit down and finish playing through because I was enjoying it. I just ended up doing something else. This happens with me a lot where I'll start a thing and then I'll get busy with something else and I'll completely forget that I was doing that. But I was also streaming that, I think, on PS Now, which isn't even a thing anymore, but it was, I don't know if it just wasn't running great. I think it was running fine, but I didn't own it, and so it was easy to kind of forget about it. Joagas Lover, were you reading comics back in 03? That's a great question. I wasn't reading new, really, at all, so not super actively, but a little bit here and there. I was collecting more than I was reading, and then I got way more into comics again the following year when I bought out my first big collection with Sarah. Well, I say with Sarah. I spent my own money on it, but she helped me catalog and archive, and I started a little eBay business with it, and that got me a lot more into comics just in general. Robert Wilde, I always enjoy hearing your life stories, Cap. You're an interesting guy. Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, I never know if I'm going to bore people to tears or if there's going to be any interest in these more vlog-style streams and videos. But I was just, a week or two ago, thinking back, kind of flashing back to 03 in that summer and going, man, I really miss those times, and I don't know how 20 years have already passed us by, and how I've already got 5 kids, and it feels like really bygone times. Like the world feels like a very different place than it did right then, and even just technologically, I didn't have a cell phone yet. Some people I knew did. They became a lot more prevalent, just flip phones a couple of years after that. So I remember being on campus when I first went to college, like counting the cell phones, like how many people were walking around with them, and even MP3 players were just kind of gaining prominence. I remember I got a PDA, we always jokingly referred to me and my friends as a public displays of affection, but I had a Palm Pilot, and it couldn't go online. It was black and white. It was mega bulky. It was like the size of a TNG tricorder, and you could, through USB or whatever we were using then, it must have still been USB. It's kind of weird that format hasn't gone out yet, but entirely. But you could, I say entirely, I mean, I still use a lot of USB. But anyway, you could sync it up with your computer and download things that were specifically meant for the PDA, and it was real limited in what things people were making for it. It was apps before apps, and I remember I had we take for granted being able to, watch Star Trek episodes or whatever on our cell phones now. I remember the first time I ever did that was a big deal. I was like walking around my cul-de-sac or whatever in like 2008, 2009 going, this is nuts. Like I'm watching Best of Both Worlds on my phone right now. Oh, I was going to talk about Star Trek. I'll try to, I'm scatterbrained. I'll go back and try to do that. But anyway, I remember the first time I could look at an episode guide for Star Trek on a little digital device and look at just plot synopses and stuff and remind myself of what episode titles were. And it was a novelty. It was a real big deal. And at that point, I was already using the internet quite a bit. I'd already been, selling things on eBay, and I used Wikipedia and lots of different things with just websites. But having anything remotely portable like that, even though it wasn't online, that you could, that was basically a little computer in your hand that you could scroll and stuff, that was a big deal. Here's what I wanted to mention about Star Trek. Pardon me. My dad bought me the first 5 seasons on VHS. So like 2 episodes of tape. They were clamshell cases. These were the Columbia House tapes. And they took up, when I finally filed them away later, I don't have them anymore. I sold them at a yard sale because, of course, I have all that on disc now. And sometimes I wish I'd kept them just, for the fun of it because they looked cool. But they take up a ton of space. They took up like half a dresser. I put them in dresser drawers because I didn't have space on bookshelves or anything for them. But anyway, I remember thinking I was this huge Star Trek fan. And I had been running a club. This is why I brought that up earlier. I had been running a club. We had lots of different events. We watched an episode every week, which was all taped off TV, except for some tapes that I'm all over the place. There was a lady that my mom was friends with who was in the school district, who owned a lot of the Columbia House tapes, so the same tapes that we're talking about that my dad gave me, and she let me borrow stuff that I didn't have up until that point, and she had, they were still putting, this is how early this was, they were still putting the DS9 VHSs out. They weren't even done with that yet. I think they were up to like season 5 of that maybe. So TOS, TNG I was borrowing from her. Voyager and Enterprise I had to tape off TV, and if I didn't have the episode taped, we couldn't watch it. But I thought I was this big Star Trek fan, and then I got those tapes and realized that there were some major episodes that I had read about and talked about, but had never actually bothered to sit down and watch. My favorite episode now of TNG, A Matter of Time, with Matt Frewer, which I talk about all the time, Berlinghoff Rasmussen, I'd never seen that episode. I saw that for the first time on one of those overnights where it was just me by myself in one of my dad's stores, 1, 2 in the morning. I'm watching this. Like, this episode's hilarious and wonderful, and how have I never seen this before? And I realized that I'd never seen both parts of Best of Both Worlds, and I was like, I'm a fake Star Trek fan. Why did I run a club? This is ridiculous. The very next year, that same year in the fall, I started a city club that was some of the same people from the high school club, but then we got some adults involved, and it was a big spread of ages. And we had, at the start, 12 or 15 people in that club. Eventually it turned into 20, 25, and I did that off and on for 15 years. And I say off and on, the first 7 or 8 was nonstop. And we did it at my mom's house, and then eventually when I worked and lived at the Mortuary, we had Star Trek Club in the Mortuary. This was circa 06, 07. And that was a lot of fun. But the lady that lent me the tapes actually was my first officer in that club. She and I became really good friends and ran that together. So it was a multi-generational thing. And yeah, I missed that a little bit too. And the Star Trek Club that we were doing on the channel that we just called the Star Trek Club, my original club was called Trek Forever, which is kind of interesting because, of course, it didn't go on forever, and I didn't really think it would, but the idea was just Star Trek goes on forever. Our ship was you have a club, you kind of sort of half pretend you have a ship. We didn't take ourselves too seriously. We had ranks, but it wasn't a big deal. You could get points for watching Star Trek and stuff, and then you could rank up in the club, and so we had ensigns all the way up to commander. Nobody else could be a captain because I was the captain, ran the thing, and so anyway, always felt, and by the way, that's where the captain thing comes from, because I was I was a captain of my Star Trek club, and everybody was calling me that. So that's why I do that here. That's how that started. A little bit self-indulgent, a little self-aggrandizing. Maybe I have been married to it for 14 years on the channel anyway. So probably not gonna leave it now. I've half considered going by my real name like a lot of people do, and then I'm like, it's not gonna stick. Everybody knows me as Captain Logan and Cap, so I guess that's what I'll be forevermore now. But we had that really fun club, and we've Adam and Brandon and I are talking about trying to find a way to bring that back and find a time for it on the channel, the old video club that we used to do. But anyway, let's see what else folks are saying in the comments here. Busted Sim, you lived in a mortuary? I did live in a mortuary. I had free I had a free apartment there. I almost said room and board, but it wasn't really board. I had to pay for food and stuff, but all my utilities and everything were free. I had free cable and stuff. For those of you that haven't heard about this, and Busted Sim is a longtime viewer, and he's not heard this story, so I might as well mention this real quick too. This is just all Cap's personal history now, I guess. But real quick, I'll just tell this story very briefly. I interviewed for this job in 05 and didn't get it, and then in 06 it came up again, and I interviewed and I got it. And usually the mortuary that I interviewed with wanted mortuary science students, people who were studying, because that actually is a school, mortuary school, studying to be funeral directors and morticians. But if they couldn't find somebody locally that was that they liked, that was right for it, they would go to just anybody that needed a job that they thought was good for it, and usually younger people, usually students. So I got that job, and I worked nights, and every other night, every other weekend, and I would work funerals, and I had to dress up all the time, and I had to go out in the middle of the night and help pick up bodies, and I would answer phones, and I kept up with the place after hours. So if anybody called or if anybody came to the door, I had to take care of all of that, and it was a really maturing kind of job. It was a way to learn how to be in the real world and interact with people on a professional kind of level. And it got me out of my mom's house. That was the first and only apartment I lived in by myself, and I loved it. Sarah was there a lot, but we didn't live together, and she had her own place, and I had my place, and we got married in 08, like 2 weeks after I left the mortuary, just right after that. And I left because I was getting married, and because we were moving out here. That was in Lawrence, and I live now about an hour away from there. AMC, Cap's constitution is much stronger than mine. I don't even do well with open caskets. I was really concerned about that. I mean, I have a weak stomach for some things. I didn't think I'd do real well with it, and there were some things that were difficult to stomach to deal with, and sometimes it wasn't the things that I expected it would be, and I won't get gross or anything. Maybe at some point I'll do, if anybody cares, I'll do a little stream and talk about my time at the mortuary, but I came to be okay with it surprisingly quickly. Bublin says, please turn your mic up. My apologies, I didn't realize that my gain was down too much. It looks okay on my slider here. But sorry about that. Maybe the mic's just not close enough to my face. Bob the Hun, people back then would hope every episode of a show to make their own library or collection. Now it would be completely unnecessary. Yeah, that's exactly right. Robert Wild, I can't believe you remember this. He says, didn't you used to tell people that you'd seen every episode of 60s Batman when you were a kid? Yeah, I did. And I'd probably seen, see, now it looks like I'm clipping at the tops. I don't know if it's my end, Bublin, with respect. Anyway, what were we talking about? Yeah, I had probably seen 15 or 20 episodes, and I thought I'd seen the entire show. And then later I got when I got the whole series and I started watching it, I was like, wow, there's a shocking number of episodes that I've never seen. But yeah, I think a lot of us probably have, a year like this that we would go back and maybe want to live in perpetually if we had the option. I mean, obviously not, because if you overthink it, you'd be kind of stuck in a loop and you'd never progress in your life or whatever. But just you wish the world around you wouldn't change; it would stay like that. And that was that year for me. That was not to get to a depressing place or anything. I don't want to get negative. I wanted to have fun with this, but that was a time in my life where the world more or less made sense, or made more sense than I sometimes feel like it does now. And it was a time where it kind of fell apart and didn't make sense. And then there was this clarity, and it was all back together again, where I was like, you can come back from anything, and that person that you're going to want to spend your life with really is out there. And that's sappy, and that some people may not feel that way if it hasn't happened for them yet, but at least anecdotally for myself, I thought I had that. It didn't work out, and then that very same year I found that person. Sarah really grounds me. Sarah is the most practical, kind of Vulcan-like person who still has a sense of humor that I've ever known, I think. And she always, I think, thought that she needed to be around people, or, have at least a close friend. Because I don't know if Sarah ever even thought she would, date and get married before she met me. I'm the only person Sarah dated, which is probably why she married me. Because if she had, tried anybody else, I might not still be with her anymore. That's a joke, but it is pretty funny that I'm the only person that my wife dated. But anyway, I think Sarah probably always thought that she needed somebody whose head was a little bit more in the clouds, and I always needed somebody whose feet was a little bit more on the ground. I'm not a real practical person. I don't think enough about, and I've always had this, enough about my day-to-day and responsibilities, and I try to be a responsible person, and I think more or less I manage that, but it's difficult to prioritize what I think of as kind of the boring, regular, everyday life stuff. I'm a creator. I'm a I'm a person with a really overactive imagination. I just want to tell stories. I just want to think about the big, interesting philosophical kinds of ideas, and I'll clean my room when I have to. Like that was always my attitude. I always wanted to think about possibilities, and that's not to say that my wife is not a creative person with an imagination, because she absolutely is, and we like a lot of the same things. But she's just more organized than I am. She's better with money than I am. We really complement each other well, and I don't know. I've never been able to get my mind around the fact that I found that person, that I found the puzzle piece that fits together with you, that makes the picture whole. I'm not the only person that's ever said that. I didn't come up with that, but that is, I think the correct metaphor. I'm going to go ahead and get going here in a minute. Odd man out, who is Kareem. Hi, Kareem. 49 Super Chat. What is your best advice for approaching marriage and fatherhood? Goodness. I was not ready for that question, Kareem. I want to think about this a little bit, because that's a really serious, important question, and I was just about to get off stream. Real quick, let me mention that tonight we're going to do the Captain Logan show, and I'm going to ramble on again for another couple hours, but a little bit less than usual, because I'm going to give Vince a lot of the floor. Vince is going to be guesting tonight, and it's going to be just me and him on camera, just like the old days with GNN. DJ is going to be out of town, and he's not going to be there modding, so I'll do my best to mod on my own, and I'm going to sort of mod a Q&A show for Vince. I mean, I'll interject here and there, of course, but I'm going to give Vince the floor a lot and really make it kind of a Q&A for Vince. I think the best advice I can give you is to, and hopefully I'm not, I don't know, throwing my parents under the bus when I say this, but I think Because obviously, everybody makes mistakes, and I am grateful for the childhood I had, and my parents, I think, overall did a really good job raising me, but, there's going to be things that you don't like about your upbringing. And I think the most important thing is to look at what didn't work, you think, when you were being raised, and learn the right lessons from that. Don't just repeat everything you saw when you were a kid, but also be prepared for the fact that you will make mistakes, and this sounds awful, but to some degree we all traumatize our children. That is not a license to traumatize. That is not a justification for doing horrible things to your kids, and that's a very dramatic word. But when I mean traumatize, I mean it is impossible when you're an adult to fully get back in the shoes of a child and to look at the world through the eyes of a child. We all try. Most of us are not Fred Rogers. We don't all know how to do that. And Fred Rogers, by the way, wasn't a perfect parent either, because nobody is. And you listen to his kids talk about the way they were raised, and they weren't entirely happy with their childhoods either. Nobody is going to be. So you want to hold yourself to a high standard, but you also want to give yourself some leeway and not be too hard on yourself as a parent either. Because if you don't learn from your mistakes, and if you don't learn from your parents' mistakes, you just repeat all those things, and that's when you really traumatize your children. Never come in a place of anger if you can help it, but also know that you are going to get mad at your kids, and there will be times where you will accidentally lash out and take things out on your kids, and that's the time that you need to be self-aware and stop yourself and say, I recognize that what I was doing in that moment was not out of love or respect for my kid, but was out of frustration and anger, and then do your very best to correct that. So, like I said, you're going to make those kinds of mistakes, but you want to learn from them instead of just berating yourself, because if you hate yourself, you're almost certainly going to translate that to your children, and that's the worst thing that you can do to your kids. That was dark, and I didn't mean it to be, but I think that's important. I think that's the thing that a lot of us kind of struggle with. So I guess that's the fatherhood part of it. And I like that you said fatherhood, not just being a parent, because as a dad, I feel like for a lot of us, and everybody's different, I don't want to put anybody in a gender box, but I think it is true that a lot of men have more of a sense of humor, and that it can, or a sense of humor, pardon me, that might be true too, no, I'm kidding, more of a temper, and that it can be harder for us to have the same kind of patience that mothers have to have, because being a mother is a different thing than being a father. You have a different sort of connection with your child, and there are things that you have to go through and put up with as a mom that you don't as a dad, that just, for a lot of women, I think helps to give them patience, and guys don't have to deal with that, and so it's harder for us to have that, and upbringing can be a factor with all of that as well. As far as marriage goes, I don't know where to go to besides cliches. Compromise is, of course, the most important thing, but it's also important not to compromise yourself to the point where the other person, and I've never had this problem with my wife, but I've seen this with people, where you don't just defer to and go de facto to your spouse. You have to remember that working as a unit, you still are your own person. I think the most important thing is to maintain your individuality, and to have boundaries. Like, even with your spouse, even as intermingled as you have to be a married couple, to raise children if you're raising children, you still have to be your own person, and you still have to together know where those lines are. But also know that, and I think maybe this is the most important thing, marriage is weird. because people naturally drift apart very often. This is a thing that's been very difficult for me to learn through my life. People can, I always say you're never the same person day to day. People will still care about each other, but drift apart and not be compatible anymore. What if that were to happen? If you, and of course people get divorced all the time, but if you really believe in the commitment you made when you get married, what happens if, what do you do if that happens with your spouse, if you just drift apart, you're different people? If you really care about making a family work, yes, love matters, but it is in some ways not the be-all, end-all. You can learn to live together and to run a house together if your marriage is built fundamentally on the right stuff, on a mutual respect, even if major stuff changes, like you don't subscribe to the same religion anymore, or you don't subscribe to the same political party anymore, or whatever it is. I at one time thought those things were insurmountable. I used to think that if you and your wife don't believe in the same God, or don't both believe in God, you are not compatible, you shouldn't be together. Sarah and I made it work. And it's a thing I didn't used to talk about. I'm very comfortable with it now. I don't mind bringing that up. My wife goes to church, and she believes in God, and I kind of worship at the altar of I don't know. I don't think of myself as an atheist, because I think anything is possible, and I'm open to the possibilities. And I think theology is really interesting. I wouldn't mind studying the Bible. I just don't wholesale buy it. That's just me, and that's not against anybody in either direction. But we made it work. We're raising kids. We're as tight and comfortable with each other as I think we ever have been. And I think it's because we compromised. I think it's because I let her pray at the dinner table, and she lets me not go to church. And I don't have to tiptoe around in my house and pretend like I believe things I don't, even though she believes what she does, and we have a respect for each other with all of that. I get where she's coming from, and she gets where I'm coming from. But yes, I was giving advice because Kareem asked me to, and I know that was really long-winded, but that was a very loaded kind of question, and I hope I didn't do the worst job ever with it. I hesitate with giving advice because I don't feel especially qualified, but take all of that for what it's worth. I'm going to go ahead and get going. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'm going to come back tonight at 7 o'clock with Vince for a real fun Captain Logan show, I am sure. Thanks so much if you were watching live or after the fact. You guys are great, and I hope you don't mind me streaming as often as I have been this week. I thought I was going to have to quit my job over the weekend. I thought I was going to have to shut this whole thing down. And when that didn't happen, it's like all I've wanted to do is be on camera and live stream. So a lot of extra stuff right now. I can't promise, how often I'm going to be on and if that's going to continue. But right now, it's what I kind of feel like doing. And but I got a lot of stuff to do this afternoon, so I'm going to get going. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. I was Captain Logan, and have a great afternoon.